The great sin of today is that God is tuned out. No one listens for him. No one stops talking, either to others or themselves. Even in moments of silence, we replace it with noise and distraction. Why do we do this? Because in silence, God speaks. This is when we hear the truth, and not everyone wants to listen. In the life of the religious, monks and nuns in particular, silence is a necessary rule. It is very difficult to grow holy without silence, because without silence we won't hear God. God doesn't speak through noise. He speaks in our hearts. This is where he dwells. Yet we don't know how to be silent. We get uncomfortable and restless if we don't hear God, and soon our minds begins to wander. Our silence is soon over before it has barely begun, and God hasn't had a chance to speak. In his book, The True Spouse of Jesus Christ, St. Alphonsus Liguori says, "In many monasteries, the rule of silence is prescribed by the written rules, and is strongly recommended. But some of the religious appear not to know what silence is, and therefore they unhappily live in dissipation, without fervor, and always in trouble. Nowadays, silence often makes us uncomfortable. It's immediately covered up with music or chatter. In a homily, Pope Benedict said, 'We live in a society in which it seems that every space, every moment, must be filled with projects, activities, and noise. And yet the soul craves silence because God is silence.' In his book, The Power of Silence, Cardinal Sarah states, 'Silence is not an absence. On the contrary, it is the manifestation of a presence, the most intense of all presences.' It wouldn't be correct to say that God is in the silence, but that God is the silence. If you want to know God, you must come to him in silence. Oddly enough, although the world seems to fear silence, it seeks peace through modern meditation, such as yoga. And yet, God is in the silence of our hearts, waiting to speak to us. St. Ambrose relates that a certain priest, while at prayer, was disturbed by the cries of the multitude of frogs. He commanded them to be silent, and they instantly obeyed. Then he said, 'Shall senseless animals, then, be silent through respect for prayer, and shall men not?' If we want to become holy, we have to learn how to be silent. We won't be able to hear God if we are always talking. But being silent is hard for us. We communicate only with our mouths, but with God, he communicates by the heart. Being silent requires self-discipline. It means not always being the one to have something to say, or not always being the first to correct someone, or the one to make everyone laugh by a funny story. Although none of these things are bad in of themselves, our constant talking is a symptom of self-love, as it puts the focus on ourselves. Silence brings us to spiritual perfection. Not only are you practicing self-mortification, but you are also reducing your chances of sinning with idle talk that could turn into gossip or saying something hurtful. St. Alphonsus expands on this in his talk to a group of nuns about silence. "Silence shall cultivate justice in the soul, for, on the one hand, it saves us from a multitude of sins by destroying the root of disputes, detractions, of resentments, and of curiosity. It makes us acquire many virtues. How well does the nun practice humility, who, when others speak, listens with modesty and in silence? How well does she practice mortification, by not yielding to her inclination or desire to tell of a certain story or to use a witty expression suggested by the conversation? How well does she practice meekness by remaining silent when unjustly censured or offended?" The devil doesn't want us to be silent because he knows that in silence, God is there. Not only that, but in silence, much of ourselves is revealed to us, since it is God who is speaking, and he who tells us how to become holy. The devil doesn't want this and wants to distract us by noise, music, idle talk, and arguing. Cardinal Sarah says, "Noise wearies us, and we get the feeling that silence has become an unreachable oasis." Without noise, postmodern man falls into a dull, insistent uneasiness. He is accustomed to permanent background noise, which sickens yet reassures him. Without noise, man is feverish, lost. Noise gives him security, like a drug on which he has become dependent. But this noise is a dangerous, deceptive medicine, a diabolical lie that helps man avoid confronting himself in his interior emptiness. St. Alphonsus Liguori also adds, "Speaking too much causes disquiet and unrest in the soul. But on the other hand, immense evils flow from speaking too much. In the first place, as devotion is preserved by silence, so it is lost by a multitude of words. However recollected the soul may have been in prayer, if it afterwards indulges in long discourses, it will find the mind as distracted and dissipated as if it had not made meditation. In silence we can correct bad habits. Gossip, for one, is a gluttony for the mouth, and the cure for that is silence. Eudoxius the monk observed silence for 35 years, and St. John the Silent, who gave up his role as bishop and became a monk, observed silence for 47 years before his death. St. Ephrem gave this excellent lesson to the religious: speak a great deal with God and little with men. St. Ignatius would often say to himself, "Ignatius, conquer yourself," as a reminder to himself to give up his idle chatter that often led to gossip. Though we don't have to go to the same extremes of keeping silence as some of the saints did, we can challenge ourselves by practicing listening rather than talking, and making it a rule to never talk about others. Practicing silence as a way of self-discipline, as well as keeping ourselves out of trouble, is a great way to overcome a fault. Criticism is another weakness most of us have, especially in social media. St. Philip Neri had good advice. If we wish to keep peace with our neighbor, we should never remind someone of his natural defects. In social media, it's easy to cast a stone and then run, never knowing what kind of harm our words may have done. It's said that when St. Bernard of Clairvaux realized that when he was so severe with his monks that they stopped trying, he disciplined himself severely, not with whips or tools, but by forcing himself to keep silent for a long period of time. Anger as well is something we all struggle with, and silence is a great way to practice meekness. Although meekness doesn't always mean we're silent, we can practice meekness by choosing to be silent rather than speaking a sharp word or something we might regret later on. St. Jerome, who is known for his impatience and sharp tongue, learned gentleness and meekness by retiring to a cave where he lived in silence. Later, the Lord wanted to test his meekness by having people come to him for spiritual guidance, and when they eventually found him, they found a much gentler and more patient Jerome. This wouldn't have been possible if Jerome hadn't found silence, because in silence, he found God's voice, teaching him how to be more patient. Many of us are afraid to be silent because we don't know how to pray and be silent at the same time. But being silent is simply resting in God. We don't have to worry about what will be said or not said, or how it will be heard. We need to just allow ourselves to be still and let God in. Cardinal Sarah says, "Being silent is difficult, but it enables man to let himself be led by God. From silence is born silence. Through God the silent, we can attain silence, and man is unceasingly surprised by the light that pours forth." The most important times in our life have been spent in silence. In the womb we grew in silence. In death we are silent. No longer able to speak, we are forced into silence, and therefore reflect in our lives. And in Holy Communion, Jesus is silent in our hearts. These moments of silence were created and set aside for us, and yet so many people waste them by daydreaming, or even leaving right after Holy Communion. Jesus doesn't speak to me, so many people say, but they haven't learned to be quiet enough to listen. The devil doesn't want us to be silent. He wants us to be distracted. Because if we are distracted, what truth will God say to us?